I sat in the front pew, hands folded in my lap, watching people file past Robert's casket with hollow words and rehearse sorrow. 32 years of marriage had ended not with a goodbye, but with a silence so loud it echoed through every fiber of my being. My name is Madeline Carter. I'm 53 years old, and for the last 3 decades, I've been the backbone of Carter Company, the construction firm my husband and I built from a leaky garage and a broken fax machine. I've poured concrete while pregnant, drafted contracts at 2 a.m., and closed $1-million deals in heels and hard hats. I wasn't just Robert's wife, I was his partner, in every sense of the word. Behind me, I could hear the whispers my son Blake, 31, murmuring to his wife, and my daughter Lauren, 28, doing the same with hers. Their tones were hushed but firm, as if speaking in quiet voices made the conversation less ruthless. "Mom needs guidance now," Blake said softly, but just loud enough. "She's under stress," Lauren added. "We should talk about the transition." What I needed was for Robert to walk through the church doors and tell me this was all a mistake. What I got was the beginning of a hostile takeover at his funeral. "Mom," Blake leaned down, his voice dipped in performative concern. "We should really start talking about the company." I turned slowly. He looked so much like his father, but softer, polished, the kind of man who wore cufflinks to breakfast and thought a hard day's work meant closing a PowerPoint deck. "Not today," I said evenly. "But Dad would want. Your father would want you to let his body cool before you try to split up his legacy." The words cut through the hum of murmured condolences like a blade. A few heads turned. Lauren stepped in, heels echoing on polished marble. "We just want to be practical," she said sweetly. I stood up, smoothing the same black dress I'd worn to Robert's father's funeral 15 years earlier. "You think grief makes me weak," I said, my voice calm. "You couldn't be more wrong." Lauren blinked at me, clearly not expecting resistance. She had my height, but none of my steel. She'd always preferred sweet manipulation to confrontation. Blake, on the other hand, looked briefly flustered before composing himself. "We're just thinking long-term, Mom," he said. "Dad always said the company should stay in the family." I looked from one child to the other, 2 people I had carried, raised, loved, and now barely recognized. "Robert and I built that company, from the ground up. You think family means you're entitled to it." They didn't respond, but the silence was answer enough. Robert had started stepping back from operations 5 years ago, after his second hospital stay. Since then, I had been running Carter Company on my own, handling contracts, overseeing projects, managing payroll. I had shown up every single day, while my children pursued marketing degrees and yoga teacher certifications. "You both know how to use spreadsheets," I said quietly. "But have you ever stood on a construction site at 5 a.m., negotiating with a supplier who doesn't speak English? Have you ever had to delay payroll because a client missed a wire transfer, and then figure out how to pay 50 men by the end of the day?" Neither of them answered, because they hadn't. They hadn't laid a single brick, driven a single nail, or signed a single contract that mattered. "What you want isn't to preserve a legacy," I continued. "It's to claim one you didn't earn." Blake took a step closer, his cologne rising up between us like expensive smoke. "We're not trying to push you out," he said. "We just want to help lighten the load." "A load you've never carried," I replied. Lauren tried again, her voice gentler. "You're 53, Mom." Grief clouds judgment. "You don't have to do this alone." I gave her a thin smile. "No," I said, "but I sure as hell won't hand it over to 2 people who think leadership is inherited." I turned away, back toward Robert's casket. His hands, once so strong, were folded peacefully. But I felt something stir in me, not grief, something sharper. Resolve. The funeral service passed in a blur of hymns, eulogies, and handshakes. People spoke of Robert's integrity, his vision, and the company we had built together. But I barely heard them. What echoed in my ears was a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. That morning, while standing in the church bathroom, I paused when I heard familiar voices outside the door. "She'll fight us," Lauren said. Her tone wasn't sad, it was strategic. "Not if we handle it right," Blake replied. "We frame it as honoring Dad's legacy. We talk about taking care of her, about preserving what he built. She's emotional, vulnerable. If she resists, we remind her she's not getting any younger." There was a silence. Then Blake added, "Running a construction company is a young person's game." I stood frozen in place, my hand gripping the sink, heart thudding not from sadness but from recognition. They had already made their move. And I finally saw them clearly, not as my children, but as two ambitious adults trying to unseat the one person standing between them and the prize. They weren't mourning. They were maneuvering. I returned to the sanctuary, expression composed. I smiled at mourners, thanked the florist, and accepted condolences from clients and colleagues. But inside, something cold and clear was crystallizing. I'd built this company once. I could defend it now. They thought I was weak because I'd lost my husband. They forgot I had been his equal in every deal, every contract, every late-night crisis. I was the one who handled the lawsuits, negotiated with banks, dealt with inspectors. I was the one who kept Carter Company running while Robert was in and out of hospitals. And I would be the one to keep it alive now without him. As we buried Robert that afternoon, I watched Blake and Lauren standing by the grave with perfectly timed tears. And I knew something else. Oh, they had declared a quiet war, but they weren't the only ones who could strategize. Because what they didn't know was that Robert and I had already been planning ever since his diagnosis. And while they were preparing to strike, we had been preparing to defend. That night, after the last mourner had left and the house was quiet again, I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table. The space felt hollow, without Robert. No soft humming as he reviewed project bids, no smell of his late-night coffee. But there, on the coffee table where he'd always left things he wanted me to find, was the folder. A plain manila folder, labeled in his handwriting, contingency, in case of my death. I opened it slowly. Inside were pages of documents, contracts, corporate revisions, succession plans, most of which we had reviewed together in the months before he passed. But seeing them all in one place, in his familiar, meticulous order, brought a strange kind of peace. There were letters to our attorney, a revised corporate charter, and copies of board resolutions we had signed together 18 months earlier. There were even notes in the margins in his handwriting. Madeline handles this best. Blake never followed through. Lauren's interest is shallow, be cautious. He had seen what I was only just beginning to understand. They weren't ready. They weren't worthy. And they certainly weren't entitled. In the middle of the stack was a single-page document with a yellow post-it note attached. You'll need this sooner than you think. It was the updated succession clause. In the event of the death or incapacitation of either founding partner, full operational control transfers to the surviving partner with unilateral authority to restructure ownership, appoint or remove board members, and execute any business decision without consent from other shareholders. In other words, me. I sat back, breathing slowly. Outside, the neighborhood was dark. The streetlight flickered. Inside, the air felt sharp, electric. Blake and Lauren thought they were about to inherit a company. What they didn't know was that Robert and I had ensured they'd inherit nothing they didn't earn. By the time the grandfather clock chimed 3 a.m., I knew exactly what my next move was. They had opened the first chapter of a battle. I would write the rest of the story, and I knew how it would end. At exactly 8 a.m., Monday morning, 2 cars pulled into my driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as Blake stepped out, adjusting his tie, and Lauren followed, holding a tray of overpriced coffee. Coordinated, calculated. I didn't move to greet them. I didn't unlock the door. I let them use the spare keys I'd given them years ago for emergencies, not interventions. Mom, Lauren called, her voice unnaturally cheerful. We brought breakfast. Of course they did. Nothing says we're here to take control of your life like a box of gourmet pastries. They found me at the kitchen table, already dressed, sipping black coffee. Robert's chair sat empty. Blake slid right into it without asking. You're up early, he said. I've been up early for 30 years, I replied. Business doesn't stop because someone dies. Lauren winced but recovered quickly. We just want to talk, Mom. About Dad's wishes. About the company. I didn't answer. Blake opened his laptop, turning the screen toward me. Charts, spreadsheets, forecasts. We've reviewed the structure of Carter Company, he began. Since Dad held 49% and you hold 51%, that creates certain operational burdens for you now that he's gone. Does it? I said, folding my arms. Well, yes, because his shares now. Have they passed to you? I asked, cutting him off. They froze. What do you mean? Lauren asked cautiously. I stood and walked to the sideboard. Your father was precise, thorough. Every contract, every clause we reviewed together, including the one that says, in the event of his death, full control transfers to me. Sole authority. I turned to face them, calm and steady. You didn't inherit his shares. They looked stunned. No amount of cold brew or breakfast pastries could soften what I said next. You don't own this company, and you don't control it. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt grounded. They had come to seize what they believed was theirs. They were about to learn that belief means nothing without legal standing. By Tuesday morning, I received the first call. So Mrs. Carter, the voice said politely, this is David Ferran from Summit Ridge Development. I hope I'm not calling too early. We were contacted yesterday by your son, Blake, regarding the potential sale of Carter Company. I paused, gripping the phone tighter. I'm not interested in selling, I said. There was a brief silence on the other end. That's surprising. Blake told us you were stepping back from operations due to emotional strain, and the family was looking to transition ownership quickly. I thanked him and ended the call. Then came two more, Sterling Holdings and an equity group from California. All had been contacted by Blake or Lauren. All had been told I was overwhelmed with grief and the company was financially unstable. One even had a projected valuation that was 40% lower than our real books. My own children were not only trying to sell the business, they were devaluing it to make it easier to offload. I made my own calls. I reached out to Patricia Greer from Blackwell Construction, a longtime collaborator. Madeline, she said without hesitation, Blake reached out to us, said the company was bleeding money. But I knew something was off. Your last quarterly numbers were stellar. She sent me everything: emails, voice notes, spreadsheets. I now had hard evidence of deliberate misrepresentation. But even more alarming was this: they were using Robert's death as a selling point. Blake had told one firm that Mom isn't in a place to make sound decisions, and that the window to sell is narrow before legal complications arise. I sat in Robert's office that evening, staring out the window at the fleet of trucks parked in neat rows, the same trucks we bought together after landing our first major contract. He had fought for every inch of this company. So would I. I drafted a company-wide memo. No sale, no negotiations, no unauthorized communications. I booked a conference room and scheduled an emergency all-staff meeting for Wednesday at 4 p.m. They had tried to start a war in whispers and shadows. But I was going to shine a spotlight on everything. And I was just getting started. The conference room filled quickly. Project managers, site supervisors, administrative staff, even field crews came in from job sites. These weren't just employees. They were the backbone of Carter Company. Some had been with us since the days of renting folding chairs in a borrowed trailer. They deserved to hear the truth. I stood at the front, beside Robert's framed photo and a stack of binders. Thank you all for coming on short notice, I began, my voice steady. You've probably heard rumors about the company being sold. Let me be absolutely clear: Carter Company is not for sale. The room fell silent. Then a hand went up. Tom Mendoza, our senior project manager. Mom, Blake told some of us that you were planning to retire, that the family had agreed it was time. I nodded. Blake spoke without authority. I am 53 years old, in excellent health, and fully capable of continuing in my role. Robert and I prepared for this transition years ago. His passing was a loss, but it was not a disruption to our leadership. There were nods, quiet murmurs of relief. Then Lauren appeared at the back of the room, cheeks flushed. She looked like she'd sprinted in. Mom, can we speak privately? She asked through clenched teeth. I didn't flinch. If you have business concerns, you can address them here. This is a company meeting. You're making decisions out of emotion, she said, trying to keep her voice low. This is reckless. No, I said, locking eyes with her. This is leadership. I turned to the team. Effective immediately, Carter Company will begin the process of transitioning to employee ownership. We are implementing an employee stock ownership program. Long-term employees will be given the opportunity to acquire equity stakes in the business. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Tom stared at me. Are you serious? I nodded, dead serious. Lauren stepped forward. You can't do that. I can, and I have. As majority owner, I have full authority to restructure ownership. Her jaw dropped, but I wasn't finished. This company will no longer be vulnerable to the whims of entitlement or outside buyers. It will belong to the people who built it. The room broke into quiet applause. Hands shook, tears welled. Lauren stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I didn't chase her. Because I wasn't going backward anymore. Only forward with the team that earned it. By Friday morning, the battle escalated. A courier arrived at my door, awkwardly apologizing as he handed me a thick envelope. I signed for it, still wearing my robe, coffee in hand. Carter vs. Carter, it read. Inside, a petition filed by Blake and Lauren requesting a court-ordered mental competency evaluation and emergency conservatorship over both me and the company. They claimed I was suffering from grief-induced psychological decline that rendered me incapable of making rational business decisions. They cited hostility toward family, erratic leadership behavior, and sudden, destabilizing policy changes, referring, of course, to the employee stock program. I sat down slowly and read every word. Then I picked up the phone and called Penelope Hartman, the attorney who'd worked with Robert and me for over 15 years. I've been expecting this, she said calmly. You're not alone, Madeline. We prepared for this exact move. Can they win? I asked. Not a chance in hell, but they can cause damage, court delays, press leaks, stress on the business. And just like that, my inbox began to fill. Construction Weekly ran a headline. Carter Company faces leadership crisis amid grief-related dispute. Anonymous sources questioned my fitness to lead. Clients began calling not to cancel, but to check whether I was still in charge. I was. And I was going to prove it. By Sunday night, I had every financial statement printed and color-coded, every client testimonial in a binder, every safety record and project timeline organized. They thought they could weaponize grief against me. They didn't realize grief had sharpened me. By trying to take everything I'd built, they had given me a platform to prove why I built it in the first place. The preliminary hearing was set for Monday. I planned to arrive early and prepared for war. The courthouse buzzed with reporters and murmurs. Words like power struggle, family betrayal, and mental competency echoed in the corridors. But I walked in steady, dressed in Robert's favorite Navy suit, the one he said made me look like I could negotiate with the devil and win. Penelope met me at the door, her silver hair sharp, her eyes sharper. They're panicking, she whispered. Their lawyer called this morning asking if we'd consider mediation. After they told the world I'm unfit to run my own company, I shook my head. We finished this in court. Inside, the room was packed. Former clients, employees, even a few business school students scribbling notes for a case study they'd no doubt write about Carter v. Carter. Blake and Lauren sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed for a boardroom, not for battle. Their lawyer, Davidson, wore the smug confidence of someone who underestimated his opponent. Judge Morrison, a seasoned woman with steel-gray eyes, wasted no time. Mr. Davidson, she began, your clients claim Miss Carter is mentally incompetent to operate her business. Please cite specific evidence. Davidson cleared his throat. She made abrupt ownership changes without consultation, implemented an employee stock program unilaterally, and has shown hostility toward family members. Has she missed payroll, defaulted on contracts, failed safety inspections? Davidson faltered. No, Your Honor, but we question her judgment under emotional strain. Penelope stood. Your Honor, we have 5 years of financials showing growth, stability, and industry-leading performance under Miss Carter's leadership. She handed over the binder we had prepared. The judge flipped through it: project completions, client testimonials, safety awards, profitability metrics. She raised an eyebrow. Impressive. Then she turned to Blake and Lauren. Do either of you have professional experience in construction, engineering, business operations? Blake hesitated. Were her children, were concerned for her. That's not what I asked. Lauren added, we both have degrees in marketing. So, no relevant expertise in construction, the judge concluded. Then Penelope dropped the final blow. We also have documentation that, prior to this petition, the plaintiffs contacted multiple buyers to sell the company, misrepresenting Miss Carter's mental health in the company's finances. Judge Morrison's tone turned ice cold. You filed to declare your mother incompetent while secretly shopping her business behind her back. She paused, then delivered the verdict. Petition denied with prejudice. This court refers the matter for potential investigation of fraud. In a single moment, their scheme collapsed. And I finally stood victorious. As the gavel struck and the courtroom emptied, Blake and Lauren sat frozen, pale and speechless. Their attorney was already packing up his face, a mix of defeat and embarrassment, likely calculating how fast he could distance himself from this train wreck. I stood, walked to their table, and placed one final document between them. It was Robert's addendum to his will, his final safeguard. If either heir initiates legal action against their mother or the company, I said clearly, they forfeit all rights to inheritance. Blake's hands shook as he read. This can't be legal. It's perfectly legal, I said, and ironclad, just like everything your father did. I looked at both of them, my children by blood, but strangers in intent. You're both fired. Effective immediately. Security will collect your badges, your company credit cards are canceled, and your health benefits terminated. And then I walked out past the reporters, past the cameras, past the whispers. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine and toasted Robert's empty chair. 6 months later, Carter Company was thriving, now officially 100% employee-owned. Exactly as we had envisioned. Industry publications hailed our transition as a model for sustainable leadership. Clients renewed contracts. New hires arrived, excited by a future they could help shape. And Blake? His startup folded. He's now working a mid-level sales job somewhere in Nevada. Lauren? She was let go from her marketing firm when clients began asking uncomfortable questions about her ethics. They've both reached out since then, apologies, explanations, begging for reconciliation.
I deleted every message. Some call that cold. I call it clarity. Because grief taught me something that success never could. Loyalty is earned, not inherited. Family is chosen, not assumed. And leadership means knowing exactly who you are, especially when others try to tear you down. So go ahead, share or comment where you're watching from. Because this isn't just a story about revenge.